Canadians across the country are bracing for more extreme heat this week. This map shows all the active heat warnings that have been issued across the country. And as you can see, there are currently warnings in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Southern Ontario, and throughout Atlantic Canada. Temperatures aren't expected to cool down in many places for at least a few days. And for more on this extreme heat, we are joined by Dr. Christopher Labos. He's an epidemiologist and cardiologist, and he joins us from Montreal today. Good morning, Dr. Labos. Thank you so much for breaking this down for us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with these extreme heat warnings. You know, I think the concern over the last few years is the unpredictability of the weather. And as these heat warnings are coming earlier and earlier, what are your concerns that this is coming so early in the summer?
Well, I think the concern is exactly that. I mean, these are unpredictable, and yet the one predictable thing about them is that they seem to keep happening. They seem to be coming more frequently, they seem to be lasting longer, and they seem to be starting earlier. And this is concerning because whenever you have a prolonged heat episode like this, any heat wave, we do see spikes in mortality. I mean, this is not a trivial thing. This is not a theoretical thing. More people die. And so if we're going to have more and more extreme weather like this, which we do seem to be having, hot spells during the summer and cold spells during the winter, more people are going to die. And especially if you're a vulnerable population, if you're homeless, if you're elderly, if you have underlying medical problems, if you work outdoors, you're going to be the type of person that's going to be at higher risk and more susceptible to the negative impacts of extreme weather like this. And so this is something we have to start thinking about actively and start thinking about, well, what do we do to try to prevent and protect the most vulnerable people in our society?
Dr. Labos, let's talk about heat strokes. And this is something that I think that we talk about every summer, but I'm curious to know whether heat strokes with extreme heat looks different. What should people be looking out for?
Right. So the definition of a heat stroke, there's actually a few different terms in this spectrum of disease of what we refer to as hyperthermia, meaning your core body temperature going up. So you can start off with heat exhaustion, and that's when you start to have the cardiovascular manifestations where you're more short of breath. You can't sort of keep up with other people in terms of exercise. This often happens with kids who are outdoors playing sports, right? Everyone else is out there playing football or soccer or what have you, and they just can't keep up because they're getting more and more short of breath. So that's heat exhaustion. Heat stroke is when you start to have the neurological symptoms that go with it. So you start to become more confused, disoriented, dizzy, and that's when you can fall into a coma and possibly even die as well. So there's a spectrum of disease out there, but the symptoms can go from the relatively mild, where you're just, very hot, very short of breath, to when you start to have your brain not functioning properly, and that's when you really need to get to the emergency room so you could start a cool down protocol to sort of lower your core body temperature.
And let's talk practical tips, with these extreme heat temperatures coming earlier in the season, prolonged heat waves. What do people need to do to protect themselves?
Well, don't go outdoors. When it comes to kids, whenever you're having outdoor sports events like this, sometimes they need to be canceled because of the extreme heat, or just pushed back to later in the day, like push it back to dusk when it cools down a little bit. So with kids, don't have them outdoors running around for a couple of hours if they have, a planned game. That's not going to be safe. When it comes to older individuals, well, and for all of us, frankly, is that if you don't have air conditioning in your home, we need to get it. And we have to have a very serious conversation in this country about updating some of our older infrastructure to make sure our schools, our hospitals, our long-term care facilities have air conditioning, because it is becoming increasingly untenable to not have air conditioning when you have weather spells like this. If you don't have air conditioning in your home, the two things that you can do is get at least a fan to circulate the air to cool you off, or even better, get to somewhere where there is air conditioning. So spend the worst of the day in a library, a shopping mall, somewhere where it is air conditioned so that you're not put at risk. And stay hydrated during days like this, because the dehydration can make the organ damage from a heat stroke even worse.
And Dr. Labos, really quick question before we switch topics, because I know how easy it is to lose track of how much time you spend outside when it's so hot, especially for parents with young children. How long should you be outside when you have these extreme heat temperatures before you go in or before you hydrate?
Really as close to zero as possible. I mean, frankly, if you're going to be out for 15, 20 minutes, that's probably going to be okay. But anything more than that, not only you're putting yourself at risk for heat stroke, but you're also subjecting yourself to all the regular sun damage to your skin. So honestly, not more than that. And the minute you start feeling unwell, that's a good indication to pull the plug, get in, cool off. And if you have to be outside for long periods of time because you work outdoors, take multiple breaks, drink lots of water, and do it like several times per hour just so you can cool off a little bit.
All right, noted on that. And then let's switch topics now. There's new optimism to a strategy for early prostate cancer treatment called radioligand therapy. Can you explain what that therapy is and how it works in treating prostate cancer?
So it's basically, a lot of discussion is going around this new medication now. So radioligand therapy is essentially this. It's radiotherapy, but instead of being delivered externally, so you have a machine that's shooting radiation at you to sort of burn the tumor wherever it's located, be it your prostate or your lungs or head and neck or what have you. It's a radioligand. So there's actually two parts to this medication. There's a radioactive part, that's the radio part, and the ligand part is the part that sticks to the tumor. So with prostate cancer, although you could do it with any other things, you can have something that binds to the prostate-specific membrane antigen. So it's a part that's going to stick to the prostate cancer cells. It's attached to something that's radioactive, and so you can deliver radioactive particles directly to the tumor cells, even if they've metastasized across the body. The issue with radiation therapy is that it has to be delivered at a specific location, and so much of the planning has to be about making sure you try to spare the normal tissue as much as possible. But if you have a radioligand, what you can do is you can just inject it intravenously. It'll spread throughout the body, but only stick to the tumor cells and deliver the damaging radiation only to those tumor cells.
And how do you know, doctor, if you are a good fit for this kind of therapy?
Well, specifically for prostate cancer, the medication that we're talking about is indicated for metastatic prostate cancer that has failed all other therapies. So if you have prostate cancer, unfortunately, and if it has spread and you've tried surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, you've tried the hormonal therapy that we often use for prostate cancer, and you still have spread, this is the type of medication that would be used in that particular situation. If you had a localized prostate cancer, meaning they discovered a tumor in your prostate, you probably wouldn't use that for a couple of reasons. You could do a very specific therapy of just remove the prostate or deliver radiation directly to the prostate. So you wouldn't need something like this because it is a very expensive medication. And so it's most useful for when cancer has spread because you, for practical reasons, cannot deliver radiation to different parts of the body simultaneously. With radioligand therapy, it's an intravenous infusion and it'll spread everywhere.
All right, always good to have you. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Labos.
My pleasure. You take care.
Take care.